Darkness lingered over the mountains, not the darkness of night, but of unknowing. In that silence, the world waited for the past to speak. From the dust of forgotten kingdoms, a faint glow began to rise, the birth of archaeology, a fragile science daring to unearth memory from stone. It was an age of awakening, when curiosity transformed into method and scattered ruins became a bridge to our origins. Among those drawn to this new frontier stood Henry Rawlinson, a British officer whose fascination with ancient markings would alter the course of history. On a towering cliff in what is now Iran, at a place called Behistun, he found inscriptions carved deep into the rock, a message left by kings who had long turned to dust. With relentless patience, Rawlinson began to trace the strange wedge-shaped symbols, the forgotten language of the Sumerians, perhaps the first civilization to leave their thoughts engraved in clay and stone. Slowly, painstakingly, the meaning of those signs unfolded. By the 1830s, the code was broken. For the first time, humanity could read the words of people who lived 5,000 years before us. The discovery did not just illuminate one culture, it unveiled the dawn of civilization itself, the moment when human thought first took permanent form. The mountains had spoken at last, and through their voice, our shared story began to breathe again. The discovery ignited a sense of purpose. For the first time, delving into the ancient world of the Sumerians had direction and meaning. Expeditions multiplied, their paths leading to the lands we now call Iraq, the very soil where, thousands of years earlier, the first great cities of Mesopotamia had risen from the plains. Across decades of excavation, archaeologists unearthed a growing chorus of voices from that vanished age. Clay tablets, temple relics, fragments of daily life that had once belonged to the earliest known civilization on Earth. Each find was a step closer to understanding who we once were. By the spring of 1872, that path led north to the outskirts of Mosul. There, under the blazing sun of the Mesopotamian desert, an archaeological mission prepared to uncover what remained of Nineveh, the ancient capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, a city once described in the Bible and long buried beneath centuries of silence. The expedition was led by Hormuzd Rassam and Austin Henry Layard, both driven by a single desire: to recover the lost memories of humanity, sealed away by time itself. What they found would exceed every dream. Digging through layers of dust and ruin, the team stumbled upon the foundations of a palace, the royal residence of Ashurbanipal, the last great king of Assyria, who had reigned in the 7th century before Christ. For the first time in millennia, human feet once again crossed the threshold of a monarch's home. The find was extraordinary on its own, yet what lay hidden within would prove far more remarkable. Among the ruins, the explorers uncovered a passageway that seemed to lead toward a sealed chamber. Clearing the debris room by room, they entered a space that had not seen light since the empire's fall. Inside stood shelves of ancient knowledge, the royal library of Ashurbanipal. The sight was beyond imagination. Thousands of clay tablets lay preserved in astonishing condition, each covered in wedge-shaped cuneiform script. There were more than 15,000 of them, the earliest library ever discovered, a treasure trove of humanity's first written thoughts. It was as if the voices of our ancestors had been frozen in clay, waiting patiently for the modern world to listen. These artifacts, once catalogued and carefully removed, were sent to the British Museum, where scholars began the monumental task of deciphering them. The translation fell to George Smith, a young English Assyriologist whose expertise in the Sumerian and Akkadian languages made him uniquely suited for the task. For months, he immersed himself in the brittle tablets, brushing away dust not only from their surfaces, but from entire centuries of forgotten history. What he found within their symbols was a panorama of ancient life, administrative records, royal correspondence, primitive scientific observations, all fragments of a civilization speaking across 5,000 years. And then came the revelation. Among the thousands of tablets were 7 that stood apart, fragments of poetry pressed into clay more than 4,000 years earlier. Together, they told a single epic, the story of a king named Gilgamesh. In these verses, written around the year 2100 before Christ, a ruler haunted by the fear of death embarks on a journey to the ends of the earth in search of immortality. Along the way, he meets Utnapishtim and his wife, the only survivors of a cataclysmic flood, to whom the gods had granted the gift that Gilgamesh desired most, eternal life. Smith read with growing astonishment. The ancient tale spoke of a deluge that drowned the world, and of a man who built a great vessel to save humanity. The parallels with the biblical story of Noah were undeniable, though this version had been written 2 millennia earlier. It was not proof of the same event, but a reflection, a shared memory of disaster passed through generations, reshaped by culture and faith. Still, to 19th century eyes, the connection was staggering. On the 3rd of December, 1872, George Smith stood before the members of the Society of Biblical Archaeology in London and read his translation aloud. As the words of Gilgamesh filled the room, the audience sat in stunned silence. For the first time, modern man heard the voice of his earliest ancestors, a voice that had spoken of loss, courage, and the impossible reach for immortality. Though the tablets were incomplete, their power was undeniable. The past had not merely been uncovered, it had begun to speak, reshaping the way humanity would understand its own story. The discovery of Gilgamesh had electrified London. The possibility of completing the world's oldest epic promised headlines unlike any other. Determined to close the story, the Daily Telegraph financed a new expedition to the ruins of Nineveh, granting George Smith a single daunting mission: to recover the missing fragments of the ancient tale. If he succeeded, he would restore not only a story, but an entire voice from the dawn of civilization. As the team resumed their dig beneath the blazing skies of northern Iraq, shards of clay once overlooked began to emerge from the dust. Among them were pieces of the long-lost continuation of the epic. But these tablets carried far more than the adventures of a king. Inscribed within their fragile surfaces were glimpses of the divine world that had shaped the beliefs of the Sumerians. Smith's eyes traced symbols describing a pantheon of celestial beings who watched over humanity from the heavens. These writings spoke of gods descended from a supreme deity named Anu, the ancient personification of the sky and keeper of boundless wisdom. His union with Ki, the goddess of the earth, gave rise to their divine offspring, beings the Sumerians called Anunnaki, the children of heaven and earth. They were the oldest deities known to written history, the earliest record of humankind's attempt to understand the forces beyond its reach. The texts did not specify how many of these gods existed, but they described their descent from the sky to shape the fate of humankind. According to the myth, it was the Anunnaki who separated heaven and earth, granting the world below to humanity while Anu reigned above. Through these tablets, the origins of worship itself began to take form, a seed of religion germinating in the soil of ancient Mesopotamia. The focus of the expedition soon shifted entirely toward these divine figures. The Anunnaki, at least in the realm of written memory, represented the very dawn of theology. Weeks later, deep within the same royal library of Ashurbanipal, Smith and his team uncovered 7 additional tablets inscribed with a new story. Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth. This poem introduced another of Anu's descendants, Marduk, a powerful god who, according to the text, mixed the blood of the spirit Kingu with clay to form the first humans. In the mythology of the Sumerians and Babylonians, this act gave birth to mankind itself. To later generations, the story would echo in other sacred traditions. The imagery of life, fashioned from earth and divine essence, would reappear in the book of Genesis, in the creation of Adam and Eve, the foundation of Judeo-Christian belief. Yet Smith remained cautious. For all its beauty and symbolism, Enuma Elish was still a myth, a poetic reflection rather than a record of worship. No temple inscriptions or rituals had yet confirmed the existence of an organized cult devoted to the Anunnaki. What survived were stories, not ceremonies. Still, those stories carried extraordinary weight. They revealed that long before monotheism, humanity had already looked skyward and imagined its makers among the stars. In 1875, Smith gathered his translations and findings into a single volume titled Assyrian Discoveries. The book illuminated the origins of Sumerian culture, the cradle from which modern civilization had risen, and offered readers a first glimpse into the theology of our ancestors. For scholars, it marked the moment when myth and history began to intertwine. But for the rest of the world, something deeper had been set in motion. Within the brittle clay of Nineveh lay the seeds of an idea that would never fade, that the first gods may have come from the heavens themselves. The myth of the Anunnaki had only begun to unfold, and though its truth was bound to legend, its echo would ripple through centuries, inspiring wonder, speculation, and a timeless question about where we truly come from. 80 years had passed since the discovery of Ashurbanipal's royal library, and the fascination with the Sumerians had slowly faded into obscurity. What had once been a revolution in our understanding of human origins had become little more than a quiet corner of academic archaeology, a subject reserved for scholars and forgotten enthusiasts. The echoes of that ancient civilization seemed too faint, too distant to reach the modern imagination. Yet, in the middle of the 20th century, a few voices still refused to let the Sumerians fall silent. Among them was Zecharia Sitchin, an economist of Azerbaijani origin, who had nurtured a lifelong fascination with ancient languages and lost worlds. He was a passionate autodidact, an outsider to academia, but deeply devoted to the belief that the myths of antiquity concealed fragments of forgotten truth. Having immersed himself in speculative and pseudo-scientific writings about humanity's possible contact with beings from other worlds, Sitchin became convinced that the great civilizations of the past had not evolved alone. He believed they had been visited, perhaps even guided, by advanced intelligences from the stars. By the time he encountered the story of the Sumerians, the tablets unearthed in Iraq, and the pantheon of gods they worshipped, known as the Anunnaki, he felt he had found the key that could unite his two great obsessions: ancient history and cosmic mystery. While working in New York as an executive in a shipping company, he devoted his nights and weekends to independently translating Sumerian texts, persuaded that within them lay the true origin of humankind. In his mind, the Anunnaki were more than myth. They were evidence of a vast celestial narrative waiting to be revealed. From these interpretations, Sitchin began to construct a grand story, one that blended archaeology, mythology, and cosmic speculation. In the frozen outskirts of the solar system, he imagined a hidden world called Nibiru, a distant planet populated by beings of immense power and intellect. To primitive eyes, these visitors would have appeared divine, radiant figures descending from the heavens, the very gods of ancient lore. But in Sitchin's vision, they were not supernatural. They were explorers, a civilization on the brink of extinction. According to his retelling, the atmosphere of Nibiru had been damaged by a catastrophic environmental collapse. A massive tear had formed in its protective layer, triggering climatic chaos that threatened every form of life. The Anunnaki scientists, in their desperation, discovered that particles of finely dispersed gold could stabilize the atmosphere and restore balance. Yet gold was scarce on their home world. The only hope lay in seeking it beyond their skies. Under the command of King Anu, sovereign of Nibiru, the Anunnaki launched expeditions across the solar system in search of the precious metal. Their ships traversed the void, scanning world after world, until one day they reached a small, blue planet, the third from the sun. It was a paradise of oceans and land, rich in the very substance they sought. To them, this planet was key. To us, it is Earth. They chose the fertile lands between two great rivers, what we now know as Mesopotamia, as their base of operations. There, according to Sitchin's interpretation, the Anunnaki established their first earthly city, Eridu, built in just 7 days. Yet the work of mining gold proved grueling beneath the dignity of beings so advanced. In time, they turned to forced labor, enslaving another extraterrestrial race, known as the Agigi, to perform the extraction. But even servitude has its limits. The Agigi rose in rebellion, weary of toil, and their revolt brought chaos to the project. Faced with the crisis, the Anunnaki turned to a final, audacious solution. They would create a new kind of being, strong, obedient, capable of learning, yet forever bound to their makers. Mastering the art of what Sitchin described as genetic engineering, they combined their own essence with that of an earthly creature. The story told that the sperm of a primitive male primate was fused with the modified genetic material of an Anunnaki female, who carried within her the seed of a new species. After 9 months, the first of these hybrid children was born, the prototype of humankind. It was a story that blended myth, faith, and imagination, a modern epic spun from ancient clay. Though rejected by the scientific community as fiction, Sitchin's vision ignited the popular imagination. the gods of Sumer had returned, not as spirits, but as travelers from the stars, an idea that would echo through books, documentaries, and the enduring mystery of who, in the beginning, taught us to look up at the heavens, created in the image and likeness of their gods. The first man came into being. Adam had entered the world. To complete the design of human procreation, the Anunnaki fashioned a companion for him, a woman they named Eve. From these two, life multiplied. The children of earth learned to extract gold, to raise shelters from stone and clay, to sow the land and reap its fruits. Their makers watched with pride as creation took its first confident steps, but pride soon gave way to discontent. Against divine instruction, humanity multiplied without restraint and began to display the chaos and emotion of its animal origins. The purity the Anunnaki had intended was fading. When the atmosphere of Nibiru finally healed, its rents closed by the golden dust carried from Earth, the gods saw no further need for their servants. Humanity was expelled from the sacred city, condemned to survive beyond its radiant walls. Yet in exile, the unexpected occurred. Without their creators, humans endured. They learned to build cities, to share language, to dream beyond their limitations. For the first time, they tasted freedom. That freedom, however, was fragile. After 3,600 years, Nibiru's vast orbit was drawing once more toward the inner solar system. Its gravitational passage would soon disturb the delicate balance of the Earth. The approach of the wandering planet promised storms, earthquakes, and oceans rising in fury, a cosmic reckoning written in the skies. Knowing the devastation such a transit would bring, the Anunnaki made a fateful decision to abandon the world they had shaped. They would withdraw to their ships, ascend beyond the atmosphere, and remain in orbit until the chaos below had passed. Yet not all agreed. Enki, ruler of Eridu and son of King Anu, refused to forsake the beings he had helped to create. Defying his family and the royal court, he resolved to preserve life on earth. To a man named Utnapishtim, he delivered precise instructions. Construct a vessel, the preserver of life, capable of withstanding the floods that Nibiru's tidal pull would unleash. Using the advanced knowledge of the Anunnaki, Utnapishtim built the craft and gathered within it the genetic essence of every living species, male and female of each kind, sealed in protective vessels. In this way, the memory of all terrestrial life would endure the coming storm. Soon the signs appeared across the globe. The air grew heavy, the seas restless. Beneath the surface, the planet's core convulsed. Earthquakes split the continents. Volcanoes roared with the anger of a living world. Waves towered higher than mountains. The paradise of Eridu The garden where humanity had first drawn breath was swallowed by the raging waters. When at last the tempest subsided, only ruin remained. But the vessel had survived. From its refuge, the survivors beheld a silent horizon and the first light of a reborn world. Guided by the lingering technology of their divine mentors, they began the slow restoration of life. Rivers reclaimed their courses, forests took root, and animals once more walked the plains. In gratitude, humanity looked to the heavens and gave thanks to those who had saved them. They raised temples of mud and stone, carved images in honor of their celestial benefactors, and began the long tradition of worship. Thus was born the cult of the Anunnaki, the first recorded faith of humankind. For a time, peace returned. But within the pantheon of the gods, ambition fermented. The royal bloodlines of the Anunnaki fractured, driven by envy and desire for dominion over the new human cities rising across the land. To end their quarrels, King Anu, still ruling from distant Nibiru, divided the earth among his heirs. Each received a realm to govern, a gesture meant to preserve balance. Yet the seed of conflict had already taken root. Among those left unsatisfied was Marduk, eldest son of Enki. Denied a kingdom of his own, he defied his father's peers and claimed the city of Babylon as his domain. There he proclaimed himself ruler and supreme deity, enthroning his image among mortals. In secret, he taught his followers the forbidden arts, how to forge iron, how to temper blades, how to bind armor to flesh. Under his command, humankind became a weapon. The greatest army ever assembled rose from the deserts of Mesopotamia, sworn to Marduk's cause. The provocation could not go unanswered. Alarmed by the growing power of Babylon, the remaining Anunnaki lords united against him. The war of the gods had begun. Marduk's legions swept through Egypt and the Sinai, annihilating rival peoples and burning cities to ash. The creation that had once been the pride of the Anunnaki was now turning its weapons upon itself. When word of the destruction reached Nibiru, King Anu faced a terrible choice. To halt his grandson's rebellion, he authorized the use of their ultimate weapons, machines and energies capable of unmaking entire realms. The Anunnaki descended once more in their ships, unleashing devastation upon the lands ruled by Marduk. What followed was a storm of fire and light that reshaped the world. Great civilizations vanished in moments. Fertile plains turned to deserts. Memories of glory were reduced to smoke and dust. Humanity, terrified and broken, fled into wilderness and mountain, leaving behind the skeletons of its cities. In that silence, the gods finally understood the cost of their power. The earth they had crafted was dying by their own hand, and the beings they had raised were lost to fear and ruin. It was the end of an age. Recognizing that their wars would never cease, the Anunnaki made their final decision: to protect the fragile species they had created. They would depart forever, withdrawing beyond the reach of mortal eyes. One by one, their vessels ascended into the dark, vanishing toward the distant glow of Nibiru. In time, the stories of their coming and departure would fade into legend. For the humans who remained, the memory of the gods became myth, a tapestry of echoes preserved on clay tablets and whispered around sacred fires. Temples rose upon the ruins of their cities. Priests retold the tales of divine wrath and mercy, and generations learned to see the heavens not as home, but as mystery. The era of the gods had ended. The age of humanity had begun. And from the ashes of forgotten empires, our ancestors stepped forward into history, bearing the distant memory of those who once came from the stars. Zecharia Sitchin had found his story. The myth of the Anunnaki contained every element a writer could dream of. Ancient gods from the stars, a lost planet drifting at the edge of the solar system, and humanity created in their image. It was a narrative woven from cosmic wonder and forbidden knowledge, one that promised to rewrite the origin of our species. And his intuition did not fail him. In 1976, he published The 12th Planet, and almost overnight, the book became a worldwide phenomenon. It sold millions of copies and was translated into more than 20 languages. The fever of Nibiru and the Anunnaki spread across the world like wildfire. Among UFO enthusiasts, fringe theorists, and seekers of cosmic mysteries, Sitchin's vision found them fertile ground. His story offered them everything they longed to believe: that humankind was not alone, that our creators had descended from the heavens, and that the truth had been preserved on ancient clay tablets. Few paused to question the evidence. Most of the tablets Sitchin claimed to have translated were nowhere to be found. Scholars demonstrated that he had repeatedly confused Akkadian with Sumerian, inventing translations that suited his tale. Many of the words he decoded were, in reality, still undeciphered. Other sections that contradicted his narrative simply disappeared from his interpretations. Yet none of it seemed to matter. The Anunnaki, in his retelling, were celestial engineers, miners from a dying world who came to Earth seeking gold to heal a wounded atmosphere, and in the process created humankind as their labor force. It was a story too extraordinary to ignore. Though rejected by academia, The 12th planet crowned Sitchin as the father of the ancient astronaut hypothesis. Popular culture embraced his vision, giving birth to a cascade of novels, television series, and films that reimagined the gods of old as interstellar travelers. The myth took root not only among believers, but also in the imagination of the masses. Beneath the surface of skepticism, there lingered an ancient, irresistible question. What if the origins of life truly came from beyond the stars? In time, the fervor waned, fading like all cultural storms do. The myth of the star-born gods drifted to the margins of curiosity, kept alive mainly by pseudo-scientific circles. But decades later, when the world believed the legend had finally fallen silent, a new discovery stirred the memory of Nibiru once more. In November of 2003, astronomers at the Palomar Observatory detected a strange object far beyond the known planets. A frozen world orbiting in the outermost shadows of the sun's domain. It was the coldest and most distant body yet observed within our stellar empire. They named it Sedna, after the Inuit sea goddess condemned to dwell in the dark waters of the Arctic Ocean. Sedna quickly became a sensation among astronomers. It was a trans-Neptunian object, unlike any other, taking an astonishing 11,400 years to complete a single orbit around the Sun. Yet what truly captured scientific attention was not its distance, but the shape of its path. Sedna's orbit was wildly eccentric. At its farthest point, nearly 960 astronomical units from the Sun, 32 times farther than Neptune. At its closest, a mere 76. No known planet or celestial body behaved in such a way. According to everything we understood about the solar system's evolution, that orbit should not exist. Something, an unseen gravitational force, appeared to be tugging on Sedna, bending its trajectory into an impossible curve. The data suggested the influence of a massive, distant companion, a world whose gravity disturbed the frozen frontier beyond Neptune. Hypotheses began to multiply, but one stood out above the rest. From the earliest models, astronomers proposed that only the presence of a large, hidden planet, an unseen ninth world, could explain Sedna's strange behavior. A ghost planet, massive and slow, haunting the edges of the solar system. For some, it was a scientific puzzle waiting to be solved. For others, it was something more. The echo of a story told millennia ago, of a lost world that once crossed paths with our own. And so, in the cold mathematics of planetary motion, the ancient myth of Nibiru found a new reflection. The lines between science and legend blurred once again, reminding us that every discovery, no matter how rational, still carries within it the spark of wonder that first made us look up to the stars. The idea of a hidden giant at the edge of the solar system began quietly, almost as a whisper among astronomers. For decades, some had speculated about a vast, unseen world, one that might have lurked in the dark beyond Neptune since the birth of the sun. But the evidence was always elusive. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and none yet existed. Then, in the winter of 2014, the story changed. At the Gemini Observatory in Hawaii, American astronomer Mike Brown, already known for helping redefine Pluto's status, was studying a faint, distant object designated 2012 VP 113. It was a small world, about 450 kilometers across, yet its orbit defied all logic. Its closest approach to the Sun lay at 80 astronomical units, beyond even the Kuiper Belt, farther than Sedna itself. Such a trajectory could not be coincidence. Something enormous, unseen, was exerting its pull from the far frontier. As Brown and his colleagues examined the data, a pattern began to emerge. 4 more trans-Neptunian objects shared the same improbable behavior, each tracing an elongated path through space, all tilted in nearly the same direction. The odds of such alignment occurring by chance were infinitesimal, just 0.007%. Nature, it seemed, was pointing toward something real. For months, Brown and his collaborator, astrophysicist Konstantin Batygin of Caltech, built simulations to test the idea. What if another planet existed? A colossal body 5 to 10 times the mass of Earth, orbiting 20 times farther from the Sun than Neptune. In model after model, the pattern fit. The gravitational influence of such a planet could explain the peculiar dance of every wandering object beyond Pluto. When the numbers settled, the correlation was staggering. Over 99.99%. It was almost a certainty. Another child of the Sun, a sibling longer hidden in the cold dark beyond the known worlds. In January 2016, Brown and Batygin published their findings in the Astronomical Journal under the title Evidence for a Distant Giant Planet in the Solar System. Their paper electrified the scientific community and the world. Within hours, headlines echoed across continents. The search for Planet 9 had begun. For astronomers, it was a thrilling mystery, grounded in observation and mathematics. But in the vast theater of popular imagination, it ignited something older, something mythic. To many outside the halls of science, the discovery sounded familiar. Across the internet, in forums devoted to ufology and conspiracy, the name Nibiru resurfaced. Followers of Zecharia Sitchin's 4-decades-old theories proclaimed vindication. To them, Planet 9 was not a new world at all. It was the lost home of the Anunnaki, the wandering planet foretold in ancient Sumerian texts. They saw in the astronomers' data the long-awaited proof that Sitchin had been right all along. If gravitational anomalies hinted at a hidden giant, then that giant must be Nibiru, and its return would herald the comeback of the gods from the stars. The myth was reborn. Online, stories spread like wildfire that Nibiru was approaching once more, that every 3,600 years its orbit intersected our own, that when it arrived this time, it would unleash tidal waves, earthquakes, and a global flood to cleanse the earth, just as in the Sumerian epics of Gilgamesh and Utnapishtim, panic found fertile ground. Videos and articles proclaimed that the Anunnaki were on their way back, descending again from the heavens, not to create, but to destroy. Their world colliding with ours, erasing their failed experiment. On social networks and tabloid headlines, astronomy merged with apocalypse. Scientists were forced to intervene, reminding the public that the legend and the data were not the same story. The so-called return of Nibiru was a fabrication born from mistranslation and wishful invention. Every line of evidence for Planet 9 pointed to natural, measurable phenomena, gravitational mechanics, not prophecy. The Anunnaki were never extraterrestrials. In the historical record, they were gods of the Mesopotamian pantheon, symbols of celestial order and earthly power. What Sitchin had woven in the 20th century was a reinterpretation of mythology through the lens of modern pseudoscience. Still, the endurance of that idea revealed something profound about human nature. Even in an age of precision, instruments, and digital skies, we remain captivated by stories that place us within a larger cosmic drama. The notion of a hidden world and forgotten creators continues to echo because it touches the same questions that once inspired both religion and science. Where do we come from? And are we alone, while telescopes now sweep the frozen reaches beyond Neptune, searching for the faint glimmer of a true ninth planet? The myth of Nibiru persists, reborn in every era that hungers for mystery. Perhaps that is its truest power. Myths do not die. They evolve, reshaping themselves to fit the dreams of each generation. Today, the hunt for Planet 9 continues with patient rigor. No spacecraft has yet glimpsed it, but mathematical evidence grows stronger with every passing year. Should it one day emerge from the darkness, it will not herald the return of gods or the end of days. It will be a triumph of human curiosity, the moment we finally illuminate another corner of our celestial home. In that sense, both the scientists and the storytellers share the same instinct: to seek what lies beyond the horizon. For the astronomers, it is discovery. For the dreamers, it is meaning. Between them stretches the same night sky, endless, silent, and waiting, and the world whose faint gravitational echoes we had detected was anything but a cradle for life. Planet 9, if it truly exists, would drift some 180 billion kilometers from the sun, about 1,200 times farther than our own orbit. At such a distance, it would take up to 20,000 years to complete a single revolution around the star that gives us light. Out there, the sun would be no brighter than a distant star, its warmth long lost to the frozen dark. The planet, by all predictions, would be a miniature version of Neptune, a vast sphere of gas without solid ground, unable to shelter even the simplest form of life. Its atmosphere would plunge thousands of kilometers deep, descending through layers of pressure and vapor toward a heart of ice and shadow. So cold is this place that even the heaviest molecules would sink and vanish, leaving behind a transparent shroud that might reveal flashes of electric storms twisting in its depths, brief illuminations in an endless night, a bioluminescent ghost drifting through an ocean of darkness. For eons, it has wandered around the sun, silent and untouched, a lonely giant far from its siblings. No civilization could ever rise within the eternal twilight of that frozen world.